Hi everyone, this is Maria Mains for Gript. Thank you for joining us. Today we are speaking about recent outcry over changes to relationship and sexuality education in post-primary schools in Northern Ireland. To talk about this, I'm joined by Mark Lambe from the Campaign Against RSE, which recently organised a well-attended protest outside the NIO offices in Belfast, highlighting concerns around this new curriculum which is set to be implemented in schools in 2024. Mark, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Would you be able to tell us more about your campaign? You're the spokesman for the Campaign Against RSE. Would you tell us what this campaign is about and what is going on in Northern Ireland at the minute?
Yeah, thank you, Maria, for the invitation to come along. So, as you've already said, my name's Mark. I have been a member of an organisation called Abolish Abortion NI for the last few years, but I'm also a teacher and a father of 5 children. And as part of the regulations that legalised abortion in Northern Ireland, one of the things that was very clear to me and to our group is that they also included the requirement for the Secretary of State to change the law with regards to relationships and sexuality education here in Northern Ireland. And recently in June, the Secretary of State, Chris Harris, took the extraordinary steps to legislate on relationships and sexuality education and is imposing a curriculum from Westminster when education is essentially a devolved issue. And yes, we do not have a devolved administration at the minute. We don't have a Minister for Education at the moment, but he would be doing this whether we had a Stormont Assembly or not. And it is within his power to do so. So the relationship and sexuality education that he's imposing is specifically around abortion and access to contraception. But if you read the legislation and if you look at what he said and the resources currently in the public domain, it will go much further than that is our main belief. So we're raising a lot of awareness at the minute with parents, with teachers, with governors. We're sharing what is happening currently. We're sharing what we believe is going to be coming down the line. And ultimately, we're calling on parents to take a stand for their children. But we're also calling on our schools to take a stand and our governors to take a stand in order to protect the ethos of their school. Because essentially that is what is in danger here. We have schools in the north who have a very Christian ethos, whether they be in the Catholic maintained sector or whether they be controlled schools. There are lots of schools have a Christian ethos, and essentially they're going to face a decision in the next few months. Do they fall into line with the Secretary of State's curriculum and change their school ethos, or do they protect their school ethos by ignoring the Secretary of State's curriculum? So we're at for me, this is probably the most important change to Northern Ireland's education system in the last 100 years. And what is incredibly sad is that it's being forced upon us by a man who has not received a single vote in this jurisdiction, who has no mandate in this jurisdiction, and is acting like a tyrant instead.
And it has been a very, I suppose, hot button issue and topic in Northern Ireland at the minute. We've witnessed the DUP have come out and supported this campaign, and they have their own campaign as well, one of the MLAs. So there is, obviously you mentioned your protest, there has been feet on the ground and people clearly feel strongly about this. Why do you think this has sparked such a reaction, especially from parents?
Well, throughout the history of Northern Ireland, we have lived in a society where people have been divided by their views. And we had the Troubles across 40 years where people couldn't get along over anything. But one thing that we all agree on here, regardless of our views on the border, regardless of our views on the constitutional question, is that the children are off limits. And I think very clearly what you can see from the reaction of parents, you can see that regardless of race, of creed, of color, of background, Parents are standing together and saying, no, this is not acceptable, and we will not accept this for our children. We as parents are the primary educators of our children. It is our responsibility as parents to teach our children morality. It is not the job of the state to impose morality on our kids. And they're sending a very clear message to the Secretary of State, very many of them, to say, listen, we're not going to take part in this. We're going to take a stand against it. If needs be, we'll take our kids out of the schools completely. We'll move them to a school that is going to maintain their ethos and is going to have a Christian ethos. But at the same time, we've also got teachers and school staff raising up and saying, well, I'm not going to do this either. I'm willing to put my job on the line instead of teaching or supporting this curriculum. I simply will have no part in it. And we have an open letter currently for staff on our website. It's over 300 signatures from teachers, from classroom assistants and support staff, all who are saying that either you provide an opt-out for us or we simply won't do it. And we don't care about the consequences. Now, it's been nice to see political representatives from across our community get involved in this. We held our rally in Belfast, and we had around about 3,000 people attend. And we had politicians from the Democratic Unionist Party, the TUV, and N2, all speaking on the same platform together. The three parties who wouldn't agree on many things, but who can all agree on this. Now, what was abundantly clear on the day was that we sent invitations to all political parties to come and speak against what the Secretary of State is doing. Sinn Féin did not respond. The Ulster Unionist Party did not respond. The Alliance Party did not respond, and the SDLP did not respond. So from that, you can draw the conclusion that devolution doesn't really matter to these parties. They don't care about devolution. They don't care that the Secretary of State holds all the cards on this issue and all the control on this issue. They don't care if this is being legislated on from Westminster, and they don't care about the people who are saying, we do not want this here.
I was going to ask about the cross-community support, and obviously you say you've had the DUP come out very strongly on this, and you've had Ian too as well. They don't have any MLAs, but they do have elected reps, and that seems to be a big issue for those parties. But the cross-community support, it sort of stops, and you see maybe more so on the unionist side, people speaking out against this. That's one of the things that you maybe notice. Would that be fair to say, that the nationalist support hasn't been there as strongly?
I think it's fair to say that the nationalist support hasn't been there strongly from the parties, but it is there strongly from the people on the street. And there's a disconnect between the views of the SDLP and Sinn Féin and the views of the people that we are speaking to, the views of the teachers and the parents and the governors that we are speaking to, the views of the CCMS who control Catholic schools here in the north. And there is a vast difference between the views, particularly of Sinn Féin and the SDLP and these people. But the message that we have is that any political party who cares at all about the concept of devolution should be concerned with what is happening at the moment, because this all goes back to 2019 when when Parliament voted on Section 9 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act, which at the time people knew as the piece of legislation that changed our abortion laws. But he is now following through on paragraph 86, which is about changing the moral fabric of our country. And last year, the Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, gave himself the power from Westminster to appoint himself as any minister in the Northern Ireland Executive and to do anything that the whole Assembly would usually take to do. So he has the power of all 90 MLAs, but also has the power to appoint himself as the Minister for Communities or the Minister for Education or the Minister for Health in order to implement the requirements of Section 9. And our message to the DUP, the TUV, Ulster Unionist Party, Sinn Féin Alliance and the SDLP is, if you care at all about the concept of devolution, you should be calling for the repeal of Section 9 and for the power over these issues to be returned to the place where it belongs, to Stormont, before any executive or any assembly is reformed. For us, and I come from a unionist background, for me, the repeal of Section 9 is the priority issue. It is not the protocol. It is not the Windsor framework. I care about devolution. I care about democracy. Section 9 is an affront to those two ideas. And for me, it is the key thing that must go before Stormont returns.
The thing about the Section 9 and the Executive Formation Act of 2019, what happened at the time was that there was a public consultation and there was huge opposition to this being brought in. There was, I think it was 79% of respondents said, we do not want this law, we don't want the abortion law in Northern Ireland changed. And obviously this is something that has gone along with that. They are now doing a consultation on whether there will be a right to withdraw your child. So that's not guaranteed. That's something that they're consulting now at the minute. Do you think it's going to be a similar situation where even if you have opposition voiced in the Westminster consultation, well, they can say we did the consultation, but the results don't matter, because that seems to be what happened the last time around.
Yeah, and you know all too well that the consultation around abortion was a complete and utter sham. And it comes back to Section 9, because Section 9 required the Secretary of State to set up these services. So ultimately, it didn't matter what the people thought here in Northern Ireland. He could simply ignore the views of the people here and say, well, I have to do this because I am legally bound. And again, a lot of organisations here in Northern Ireland are placing their hope in the consultation. They're placing their hope that the consultation is going to get us out of a hole, when we know from experience that the views of the people here actually don't matter one bit. Now, the consultation itself is simply around an opt-out on the specific areas of abortion and contraception. But it will not allow parents to opt their children out of the relationships section of the curriculum that is delivered. Now, what is on that curriculum at the minute is not completely clear. But if we believe what the Secretary of State has said already, and if we look at the resources that are being produced by SIA, who are our curriculum development team in Northern Ireland, you can see that it includes a lot of very liberal, very leftist agendas, transgender ideologies, a lot of LGBT material, very unscientific, a lot of it based on pseudoscience. And children will not be allowed to be opted out of those aspects of RSE. So it is very concerning. We know for a fact that the views of the people are going to be ignored in the consultation. And this, for us, this issue doesn't have a political outcome. It has an outcome where parents are going to have to step up and they're going to have to take a stand on behalf of their children, and where schools are going to have to take a stand on behalf of their pupils and their ethos. Mm-hmm.
We've seen here in the Republic of Ireland considerable concern over SPHE education and changes in the RSE education in schools here. And the issues there that were highlighted and that sparked concern from parents were, it wasn't around abortion, it was issues like pornography, explicit sexual education, transgender ideology. So what you're saying is that that's also going to probably be of concern here for parents in Northern Ireland as well, just from maybe what you've seen of the SIA curriculum so far. So it's not just abortion.
Yeah. So again, the opt-out is specifically around the areas of abortion and contraception, but it doesn't cover the relationships aspect of the curriculum. And if you look at SIA's progression framework that they launched back in May, there are really concerning aspects of the new curriculum that I think all parents should be very concerned about. And as a teacher, one of the things that I'm concerned about is the promotion of a transgender ideology in schools, because I work with a lot of pupils who are on the autistic spectrum. I know just how easily influenced some of these kids are, how they take things very literally. And there are numerous studies that show that people who are neurodivergent, who have autism, are up to 6 times more likely to be transgender than somebody who does not have autism. And my worry is that when we start promoting this in school, that we are going to see an avalanche of children, especially on the autistic spectrum disorder, who are going to be buying into this transgender ideology and all of the consequences that come along with that down the line that are irreversible changes that human beings are making to their body. And as a parent and as a teacher, and I think we got to stress this, as teachers, we care about our pupils. And as a teacher who cares deeply about the welfare of their pupils, I simply cannot put myself in a position where I could cause lasting and permanent damage to any child that I work with.
Are you concerned as a teacher that you will not have the ability or the say to say, look, I'm not going to be teaching this, I don't want to teach this? I'm sure there are teachers who feel the same way. Are you concerned about this as a teacher?
Yeah, ultimately, I think there are many teachers who are very concerned about this. But at the same time, there are many teachers who are very angry and agitated over this. And I've spoken to many teachers over the course of the last couple of months who have said, I simply will not comply. And what we've seen in England is teachers losing their jobs because of a lack of willingness to comply with the curriculum. And unfortunately, we're in a situation here where we may see the same thing. Now, that's why we launched our open letter from school staff to the Secretary of State and to the Department of Education, which is calling on an opt-out for staff to be made. And we're asking them to provide that. And if they don't, we're simply not going to comply. Now, today I had some talks with one of the education unions who have told us that behind the scenes talks are underway between the unions and the Department of Education to provide an opt-out for staff. They're still not entirely sure what that will look like or how it will work, but those talks are underway. So hopefully the pressure that we're putting on to the Department of Education will pay off and teachers will be offered the protection that they deserve due to the job that they do, but also that teachers will not have to choose between their jobs and their opinions and their morality on these issues.
Going back a bit to the abortion issue, this is, I think, what has sparked so much of the concern among parents. And I wanted to ask, is one of the reasons why that is such a big issue because parents are concerned about the implications for parental consent? So, for example, if your child is in school and they're 15 or 16 years of age, and this framework means that they have to be taught you have a right to abortion, this is how you get an abortion, that's what's in the legislation. Could a situation unfold where you have, for example, an underage child, an underage girl, who can have that information and can access an abortion without the parental consent? And maybe the teacher, for example, maybe they confide in the teacher, but the teacher is bound by standards where they cannot tell the parents what's going on.
Yeah, and these things are already happening in Northern Ireland. Back in 2020, when the law changed around abortion in Northern Ireland, there was no formal services set up. It was a ragtag bunch of rogue doctors and nurses who were providing abortions in different trusts. Now, part of the problem at that stage for them was they did not have a formalized way of booking people in for their appointments. So Informing Choices NI, who used to be the Family Planning Association, became the central booking line for abortions in Northern Ireland, where people would call the central access number, they would give all their details, and then Informing Choices NI would pass them on to the abortionist who would make the appointment. Now, we as Abolish Abortion NI uncovered details back in 2020 where the policy director of Informing Choices NI was giving an update on how that central booking system works. And he stated in that update that Informing Choices NI were handling safeguarding issues for girls between 13 and 15 at the time, and it could be younger than that now. And they were handling safeguarding, and they were using the Fraser guidelines to see if these children could consent to medical intervention without a parent knowing about it. So we know that Informing Choices NI have been doing that, and were doing that as early as 2020. Informing Choices NI are one of SIA's recommended providers of education. So we know what these people are like, and we know these people will be chomping at the bit to get into schools. But as you said, when we start promoting abortion to children, there is absolutely nothing in legislation that stops a child from going to a doctor and requesting an abortion without their parent knowing. And we will see more and more and more of that happen under this new legislation if it's allowed into our schools.
And even with BPAS, for example, that's one of the biggest abortion providers in Britain, and they do state on their website, they say if you're under 18, if you're underage, we will ensure that you get the care that you need. So while the children are told to, they're advised to tell a parent, tell an adult that you trust, they're not in that situation necessarily going to do that, and you have this sort of situation of secrecy, and these providers are willing to provide abortions for underage girls. So I suppose that is very worrying for parents when this is coming into schools.
It's extremely worrying for parents, but as a teacher, it's also worrying from a pastoral perspective as well, because it provides an opportunity for people who are sexually exploiting children to hide their crimes by destroying the evidence of their crimes without parents even knowing. And as schools, I think it would be completely wrong for us to enable abuse and enable exploitation of children through the promotion of abortion where parents would not even know about it and would have no idea that these things were going on.
And it reminds me, there was a testimony from a young woman at the UK's March for Life. This was just under 2 weeks ago. And she had said, and obviously they have had this education in schools in England for such a long time. The Secretary of State, for example, he will argue, well, we just need to be in line with Britain on this. But what she said was she ended up having several abortions, but the first abortion she had was when she was 16, and she knew about abortion, she knew about the morning after pill, all of these things through her education at school and where to go to get an abortion. And she said she didn't even tell her mother about it. She was too embarrassed. She didn't tell her. So she went on, had the abortion, and then you can imagine what that does to a child to go through an experience like that. And it ended up having really negative effects on her throughout her life. So this is a real case and something that we could see played out here.
Oh, 100%. We, ultimately, let's call it what it is. We're teaching children to murder their own children. And the consequences of that in terms of mental health are enormous. And we need to be aware of what we're actually teaching and the consequences for the child who finds themselves in this situation, But also at the same time, let's not forget the consequences for the child who is being flushed down the toilet or thrown in the bin in their own home, because our schools have enabled people to access the materials required to eliminate them.
When we talk about the cross-community support for this campaign, sometimes people can be critical of the churches for not being vocal enough on moral issues and ethical issues, and abortion comes into that. But we did see support from the Protestant churches and from the Catholic bishops who described this change in schools as ideological colonisation. So that was very strongly condemned.
Yeah, and for me as a Christian, it is something that I get frustrated about, that I see, yes, we see statements from the churches, but what we've got to realise is that statements are simply not enough. It is not enough to make a statement on an issue and say we condemn it. They have got to provide a solution to it. And ultimately, what we've got to be, as our church is saying, and many of our churches don't say this, they say this is wrong, but they don't say why it is wrong. And ultimately, if you read in the Bible, just before the ascension, just before Jesus ascended to heaven, he left behind a few really confused disciples, but he said to them, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And as a Christian, when I go and talk to my politicians, what the message that I bring is that Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He has all of the authority, and any authority that is given to them is given by God to protect the good and punish the evil, and to uphold God's law here on earth. And ultimately, the reason that the Secretary of State is doing wrong here is not because of your opinion or my opinion or his opinion. It is because what he is doing here is a contravention of God's law. He is promoting the murder of children, and he is promoting sin. So I would love our churches here in Northern Ireland to take a more effective stand against this issue, to use the gospel that they are armed with by God to confront the Secretary of State, and to encourage their members who are finding themselves in a situation where their child is going to be in these classes, or finding themselves in a situation where they may be forced to teach these classes, to take a stand and to stand with those people. It is not enough to simply make statements on an issue as big as this.
Your campaign has the slogan, "Leave our kids alone." We saw the DUP MLA, Jonathan Buckley. He has launched his own campaign. I think it's "Let Kids Be Kids." And this seems to be really the key message that is resonating with people, is protecting the innocence of children. Would you explain that messaging and how this has become, the focal point of these campaigns?
Yeah, and I think for me, as a teacher, I love my job. When parents hand their children over to me during the school day, I treat them like they're my own. And if we want to look at it biblically, it's Jesus said to love others the way you love yourself. And I try to treat children in the way that I want to be treated. And as teachers, we go above and beyond. We give a piece of ourselves to the pupils that we work with. We help develop them into young people who are going to be able to go out into the world of work and succeed. We give them qualifications. We stay behind school to help them and support them. We push them on. And I love nothing more than bumping into pupils that I have taught over the years and hearing what they've gone on to and what they're doing now with their lives. But that's where my job ends, because ultimately I am not their parent. And it is the parent's responsibility to impart morality on their children. It is not the role of the state. And that's ultimately the message that we are sending out to Chris Heaton Harris. Leave our kids alone. These are not your kids. If he wants to teach his kids that abortion is okay, that transgender ideology is okay, that homosexuality is okay, that's up to him. But he doesn't get to make that decision for my kids or for the kids of the people that we're standing with on the street. So yes, it is a very clear, a very concise message to the Secretary of State. Leave our kids alone. They're not yours, they're ours. And it is our duty as parents to impart this information on our children, not yours.
What would you say to those who would make the argument, which is being made by some, which is, well, it's about time Northern Ireland came into line with the UK, and this is something that was just a matter of time, and that this is information that children, that pupils in school should have. What would you say to those who would be critical of your campaign?
So I think one of the key things, especially for people from a unionist background, one of the key things that gets levelled at us is that surely if you want to be part of a United Kingdom, you would want the same laws to apply in all of the United Kingdom, and you'd want commonality. But that's a very kind of narrow viewpoint, because ultimately, right across the United Kingdom, we have a very diverse range of people and cultures and societies and beliefs. And that is what makes a society work, that difference. And in fact, if you look at the statute books, there are many laws across the United Kingdom that are completely different in different jurisdictions. So for us, it is the role of the Northern Ireland Assembly, it is the role for our elected representatives who represent the views of the people who live here and work here and vote for them, to make the decisions on these issues. It is not the role of somebody who lives in London, who works in London, who has been brought up in London, to make these decisions for us or on our behalf without a single vote or without a mandate. So yes, as a United Kingdom, there are certain things we're common on, but as a United Kingdom, we are very, very different people with very different values and beliefs. And those beliefs should be respected, not trampled over, because it is our differences that make us a rich community, rather than one that is beige and placid.
Finally, Mark, what can parents who are listening to you and are concerned about this, I suppose specifically parents, what can they do about this in terms of, is there a way that this can be changed or undone, or do you think this is something that parents can take on and there can be change in this area? So
a key thing to realise here in Northern Ireland, I don't know how it works in the South, but here in Northern Ireland, we have a system where the school is run by a board of governors. And it is the board of governors who are the bosses of our schools. Many people think it's the principal, but the principal is actually just an employee of the school who is tasked by the board of governors to run the school on a day-to-day basis. It's the board of governors who make all of the decisions that impact the school. Now, there are places on the board of governors for parents, and this January, boards of governors are due to be reconstituted, and there will be spaces for parents who are concerned about this issue to get onto the board of governors of their schools and actually have a decision-making role in the future of the school. So we're encouraging parents to contact their schools and to find out more about how to put your name down as a parent governor and stand for election come this January. If you're not a parent of a child in school, you can still apply via the Department of Education to be a governor of your local school. And secondly, we're also encouraging people to contact the governors who are currently there. One of the things that happened back in, I think it was the 1940s, is very many of our schools in Northern Ireland were fell under church control. And the churches transferred the control of the schools to the state. But as part of that agreement, there was an agreement that transfer governors or governors who are ministers of churches should always have a role on the Board of Governors in order to protect the Christian ethos of the school from things like what's happening right now at this very moment. So we're also encouraging parents and communities to go to the transfer governors, the ministers who are governors on their Board of Governors, contact them directly, set up meetings with them and speak to them about this issue, because they should be at the forefront of resisting this issue. And finally, what we're encouraging parents to do is check our website, check our social media. Over the course of the next few months, as the curriculum becomes clear, we're going to be writing to Board of Governors and asking them what they intend to do. Do they intend to obey the Secretary of State and change their ethos? Or do they intend to maintain their ethos and ignore the Secretary of State? They simply cannot do both. So we're going to be publishing a list of safe schools who are willing to ignore the Secretary of State. And we're going to encourage pupils, our parents, to seriously consider whether they move their children to a different school where they will be protected from all of this ideology. What we ultimately have to realize as parents is that when we give our children to the school, we get a lot out of that. Our schools provide a fantastic education, but at the same time, when we give our children to a school, we're giving that school thousands of pounds in their budget. And by removing our children from the school, we take thousands of pounds out of their budget. At the minute, no school can afford to lose any money whatsoever. And it is a very real possibility that there will be children being moved from one school to another on the basis of RSE in September 2024.
Mark, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and to relay all this information. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you very much.